My name is Maren Clark, and for the last 5 years, I have built my life around one simple rule: people lie, but numbers never do. I work as a senior financial investigator, quietly examining accounting records in small, silent offices without ever raising my voice. So when a simple dinner invitation arrived from my estranged parents asking to meet at a quiet restaurant to clear the air, I was cautious, but I agreed to go. I hadn't spoken to my mother Alina or my father Richard since the winter. They quietly restructured my late grandfather's trust to favor my younger sister, Sienna. I sat at the corner table in my tailored charcoal suit, listening as my parents poured warm tea and recalled soft memories of past summers. But as the main course arrived, my father opened a simple blue file and slid a document across the white tablecloth. He called it a peaceful family agreement, asking me to sign a quick release form for my granddad's estate to help my sister secure a basic business credit line. I didn't get emotional, nor did I reach for the pen. I just turned to page 4 and read the small print hidden beneath the sweet words about family unity. It wasn't a simple release form. It was a structured liability clause designed to attach a $400,000 obligation onto my personal share of the land. They hadn't invited me to apologize or fix the past. They had set a quiet $400,000 trap over dinner. But I didn't scream and I didn't cry. I just took a slow sip of my ice water, handed the blue folder back, and did what I do best. I calculated my response in total silence. Because in my world, my revenge is silence, and I was in no rush at all. My father's polite smile vanished the moment the blue folder touched the table. The warm tone he had been using all evening faded, replaced by the familiar coldness I remembered from years ago. My mother set her teacup down with a light clink, looking at me with a soft shake of her head. My dad leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low so the surrounding tables wouldn't hear. He told me I was being unreasonable, holding onto old resentment, while my sister was struggling to keep her small design firm afloat. They spoke about family duty and how older siblings are supposed to step up when things get difficult. I didn't interrupt them or try to defend myself. I sat quietly, watching the tired desperation in my father's eyes and the subtle pressure my mother was trying to build. They genuinely believed that a warm meal and a few emotional words would be enough to make me sign away my security. They remembered me as the young girl who used to yield whenever the family felt stressed. They forgot that my entire professional life was built on analyzing pressure tactics. When my father pushed the pen closer, I took a breath, wiped my hands with a cloth napkin, and looked him in the eye. I quietly told him that Sienna's business debts were not my responsibility, and if they needed a guarantor, they had asked the wrong daughter. My father's breath hitched, a small shadow of frustration crossing his face. He reminded me of everything they had sacrificed for my education, calling my refusal selfish and cold-hearted. My mother placed a gentle hand on his sleeve, not to stop him, but to guide the conversation back to guilt. She softly mentioned that if I walked away from the table tonight, I would be turning my back on the only family I had left. The emotional weight of her words was heavy, meant to make me feel isolated and small. Years ago, that threat would have broken my heart, but standing in the present, I felt only a quiet clarity. I pulled a bill from my coat, placed it on top of the check, and picked up my bag. I told Richard that I was paying for my own meal and suggested that Sienna review her quarterly books carefully before making any more loan requests. I didn't wait for them to process my statement or offer another argument. I simply turned and walked toward the exit, leaving the quiet tension of the restaurant behind me. The cool air outside was steady and grounding as I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. I pulled out my phone and looked through the clear photos I had taken of page 4 while my father was reaching for his tea. As I studied the fine print under the dim car light, I noticed something subtle about the signature block on the bottom right. The preliminary filing stamp didn't look like a standard inquiry. It contained a reference number from a local regional bank where my sister held her accounts. Someone had already submitted a draft inquiry using outdated family records to see if the property title was clean. It wasn't just a sudden plea for help. It was a planned attempt that had been moving in the background for weeks. A quiet sense of focus replaced any remaining emotion. I saved the images into my secure folder, started the engine, and drove home through the quiet streets. When I reached my apartment, I didn't stay up late typing angry emails or calling legal teams. I made a cup of chamomile tea, opened my private laptop, and pulled up the public property registry for my grandfather's land. The records showed that the estate was completely clean, but there was a pending inquiry flag placed on it just 2 days ago. I systematically logged the reference code, drafted a formal notice of restriction, and sent a quiet, official request to the land office to freeze any third-party inquiries until further notice. I didn't attack, and I didn't raise an alarm. I simply closed the door to their plan before they even realized I had seen the lock. They thought they were backing me into a corner at dinner, but all they had done was remind me why I built my independence in the first place. I closed my laptop, turned off the desk lamp, and went to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own quiet answers. Sunday passed in complete silence, which was the most telling answer my family could have given me. If they had truly cared about fixing our broken relationship, my mother would have called to ask why I left the restaurant so abruptly. Instead, my phone remained completely dry, proving that their interest in me ended the exact moment I refused to hand over my grandfather's land title. On Monday morning, I arrived at my office early, watching the sun cast long, soft shadows across my quiet desk. At 9 o'clock sharp, my desk phone finally rang, displaying an unknown local number. I took a calm breath, let it ring 3 times, and picked up the receiver with my usual professional composure. It was my younger sister, Sienna, and her voice was entirely stripped of the sweet, bubbly charm she used to put on during family gatherings. There were no friendly greetings or polite inquiries about my well-being. She jumped straight into a sharp, defensive monologue about how I had embarrassed our parents in public. She claimed that my refusal to cooperate was putting her entire life's work at risk over a simple, harmless piece of paperwork. I listened quietly without interrupting, letting her vent, until her breathing grew heavy and her arguments ran out of momentum. I didn't get angry, nor did I match her tense, emotional energy. When the line finally fell silent, I spoke in a low, measured voice, asking her if she had personally reviewed the secondary terms attached to that credit inquiry. Her hesitation over the line was immediate, lasting just long enough to confirm my suspicion that she hadn't even read the document our father presented to me. She was simply acting as the noisy front for a plan created by someone else. I softly told her that real business is built on transparency, not hidden liabilities disguised as family favors. Before she could craft another dramatic response, I quietly informed her that a legal boundary had been placed on the property, wished her luck with her business, and hung up the phone, keeping my hands completely steady. An hour after hanging up with Sienna, my office remained still, but I knew the waves of my small action were already spreading. I opened my confidential system and ran a routine background verification on the regional lender associated with the draft filing. In my line of work, you learn to look past the noisy arguments and follow the quiet movement of money. What I found was subtle, but deeply revealing. The bank application hadn't originated from Sienna's boutique design firm at all. It was tied to a secondary commercial holding company managed entirely by her husband, Marcus. Marcus was a smooth-talking developer who always wore expensive shoes and spoke about high-stakes investments, but his public filings painted a very different picture. His development firm was quietly drowning in unpaid contractor fees and overdue commercial leases. My parents hadn't come to that dinner just to save their younger daughter's small dream. They were being used by Marcus as an emotional shield to extract value from my grandfather's land to settle his own personal debts. They were so desperate to maintain their image of a wealthy, successful family that they willingly turned a blind eye to Marcus's obvious missteps. I felt a brief wave of quiet sadness, not for the money, but for how easily my parents allowed themselves to be manipulated while treating me like an outsider. But sadness is a fleeting emotion when facts are clear. I didn't call Marcus to confront him, and I didn't send a warning text to my parents. A loud confrontation would only give them a reason to play the victims and twist the story to relative friends. Instead, I saved the verified corporate filing into my personal archive, compiled a clear one-page summary of the structural conflicts, and saved it under a secure password. I was giving them time to make their next move, knowing that every step they took without checking the facts would only draw them deeper into the corner they had built for themselves. By Wednesday afternoon, my mother Alina showed up at my office building without an appointment. She didn't march in with anger. Instead, she brought a small box of bakery pastries from the shop near my old high school, wearing a gentle, tired smile meant to invoke nostalgia. She sat across from my desk in the visitor chair, placing the bakery box between us like a white flag. She spoke softly, apologizing for how tense the dinner had gotten and blaming my father's pride for the harsh words. She tried to frame everything as a simple family misunderstanding, telling me how much she missed our weekend coffee chats and how proud my late grandfather would be if he saw us working together. I watched her carefully, noticing the subtle tension around her eyes and the way her fingers fidgeted with her handbag strap. She was attempting a softer, more emotional strategy because the direct pressure had failed. I let her speak for 10 full minutes without cutting her off, acknowledging her presence with small, polite nods. When she finally paused, expecting me to soften and offer a compromise, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the clean, one-page summary I had printed the night before. I didn't hand it to her directly or raise my voice in judgment. I simply placed it face down on the corner of my desk, tapping it lightly with my index finger. I told her in a calm, steady voice that if she truly cared about saving the family's peace, she should ask Marcus about the registered holding company in Delaware before giving him another dollar of her savings. Eleanor blinked, her polite smile freezing as the name hit her like a cold drop of water. She tried to dismiss it, claiming Marcus was just helping Sienna with corporate administration, but the sudden tremor in her hands gave her away. I stood up smoothly, walked around my desk, and held the office door open for her, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I love you, Mom," I said gently, "which is why I won't let you fall for a trap." My mother walked out of my office in complete silence, leaving the unopened bakery box sitting on the edge of my desk. The small tremor in her hands had said more than any lengthy argument ever could. She knew deep down that my words weren't thrown out in anger, but grounded in hard, undeniable facts. Over the next 48 hours, the quiet pressure within my family began to shift internally. I didn't receive any angry calls from my father, nor did Sienna send any long, emotional text messages accusing me of being heartless. That sudden, heavy silence meant one thing. Eleanor had gone home and asked the uncomfortable questions I had placed in her head. She had likely asked Marcus to show her the Delaware filing, and when a manipulator is asked for proof, the polished facade immediately starts to crumble. On Friday evening, as I was wrapping up my weekly file reviews, my phone screen lit up with a notification from my grandfather's estate registry portal. Someone had attempted to submit a formal administrative appeal to lift the temporary title restriction I had placed on the land. But because Marcus was rushing to bypass the legal block before the bank's internal review deadline, he had made a careless clerical mistake on the submission forms. He had listed my mother as the primary applicant without her legal authorization, using an outdated electronic signature. A quiet, cold realization washed over me as I read through the notification text. Marcus wasn't just misleading them about his debts. He was actively exploiting my parents' grief and desperation, pushing them toward severe legal trouble just to cover his own failing investments. I didn't panic, and I didn't rush to file a criminal complaint. I simply saved the system audit log, printed the automated rejection notice from the registry, and slid it neatly into my leather folder. The trap they had set for me at that five-star dinner was now closing in on the person who built it, and all I had to do was remain patient. Saturday morning arrived with a clear, crisp blue sky. I drove out to my grandfather's lakeside property, stepping out onto the quiet wooden porch where he used to sit and read the morning paper. The air smelled of pines and cold lake water, a peaceful world completely detached from the greed and chaos my family had created. As I stood there holding a warm cup of coffee, a dark SUV pulled up the gravel driveway. My father Richard stepped out, looking noticeably older and visibly exhausted. He didn't carry his usual harsh arrogance, nor did he attempt to bark orders at me like he did at the restaurant. He walked up to the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance, and looked at me with a mixture of shame and deep quiet regret. He admitted that my mother had confronted Marcus on Thursday night, demanding to see the actual financial ledger for the boutique hotel. When Marcus couldn't produce the documents, the entire illusion dissolved. My father confessed that Marcus had been using my parents' retirement savings as personal collateral for months, promising high returns that never existed, and that the 400K loan request was his final desperate attempt to avoid total personal bankruptcy. My father stood on the bottom step, his head lowered, softly asking if there was any way I could help them sort out the legal mess Marcus had created without destroying what was left of our family name. I took a slow sip of my coffee, listening to the gentle rustle of the oak trees in the wind. I didn't gloat, and I didn't lecture him on how right I had been from the beginning. I simply looked at him with calm, clear detachment. I told him that I would assign an independent auditor from my firm to handle Marcus's debt, restructuring on strict professional terms, but my grandfather's land would remain untouched, exactly as it was meant to be. My revenge was never about destroying them. It was about protecting my truth while letting their own actions hold up a mirror to their choices. My father stood on the porch step for a long moment, nodding slowly as my words settled into the quiet morning air. There were no heated counterarguments, no desperate pleas, and no attempt to regain the control he had held over our family for decades. He simply accepted the boundaries I had set, realizing that my offer to assign an independent auditor was an act of quiet mercy rather than an obligation. He thanked me in a soft, barely audible voice before turning around and driving away down the gravel driveway, leaving me alone with the peaceful rustle of the lakeside trees. Over the following 2 weeks, the restructuring process moved forward with clinical, unemotional precision. The independent auditor from my firm systematically took over Marcus's tangled accounts, separating my parents' life savings from his failing commercial obligations. Marcus was forced to sign over his remaining corporate assets to satisfy his primary lenders, effectively ending his days of playing the high-stakes developer at other people's expense. Sienna, stripped of her husband's polished illusions, closed her boutique hotel and took a modest position at a regional firm, finally learning the true value of hard work and quiet accountability. My parents sold their oversized suburban house to clear their remaining secondary debts, moving into a simple, quiet townhome near the coast. They didn't call me every day to beg for forgiveness, and I didn't reach out to act as their savior. We maintained a respectful, distant space that allowed everyone room to breathe and reflect on the past. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, I returned to my grandfather's house, sitting on the wooden porch with a fresh cup of tea. For the first time in 5 years, the heavy weight of old family expectations had completely lifted, replaced by a deep, unwavering sense of personal peace. I hadn't destroyed my family to protect myself. I had simply held up a firm mirror to their actions and allowed the truth to do its work. A month later, the final legal documents arrived at my office in a simple, official envelope. I sat at my desk as the afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, quietly reviewing the clean signatures from the State Banking Commission and the County Land Registry. The temporary restrictions I had placed on my grandfather's property were now permanently converted into a private family trust, managed exclusively under my name with strict protective covenants. No future lender, ambitious relative, or fraudulent scheme could ever touch a single acre of that land again. My sister Sienna sent a short, handwritten note to my office later that week. She didn't write a dramatic apology or ask for financial favors. She simply expressed a quiet gratitude for the firm boundary I had set, admitting that hitting rock bottom was the only thing that finally woke her up from Marcus's empty promises. Marcus himself had quietly relocated out of state to handle his remaining personal tax arrangements, completely stripped of the influence he once used to divide our family. My parents settled into their new coastal townhome, finding a simpler, more grounded rhythm to their daily lives, without the constant burden of maintaining a fake image of luxury. On my 32nd birthday, I drove back to the lake house, carrying a small brass plaque engraved with my grandfather's favorite saying about truth and patience. I fixed it neatly onto the front door frame, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me as the cool breeze stirred the pine trees around the porch. I had walked into that five-star restaurant weeks ago expecting a trap, but I walked away with complete freedom, having honored my grandfather's legacy without losing my own integrity in the process. True strength, I realized as I looked out over the still, clear water, isn't about winning a loud battle against those who hurt you. It's about standing firm in your truth until the noise around you completely dies down. 6 months after the trust was finalized, my life had settled into a quiet, fulfilling rhythm. The constant background noise of family tension had completely vanished, replaced by a steady focus on my career and my own personal peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, my firm promoted me to head of the regional forensic division, a position that allowed me to mentor younger auditors on how to read the subtle human stories hidden behind balance sheets. I taught them that true investigative work isn't about rushing to accuse people or creating loud scenes in courtrooms. It's about patience, objectivity, and letting the facts arrange themselves with absolute clarity. My relationship with my parents remained polite and distant, built on a new foundation of firm boundaries rather than emotional dependence. Every few weeks, my mother would send a brief text updating me on her quiet life near the coast, and I would reply with equal warmth and restraint. There were no more hidden motives, no urgent financial requests, and no false pretenses of a picture-perfect family. Sienna had opened a small, independent craft shop in her town, taking slow, honest steps toward financial independence without relying on shortcuts or wealthy investors. Standing on the lake house porch on a quiet Sunday evening, I watched the golden sunset reflect off the clear water, holding a warm cup of coffee in my hands. The estate was safe, my grandfather's memory was honored, and my own boundaries had proven unbreakable. Looking back at the journey that began with a dishonest dinner invitation, I felt no lingering anger, bitterness, or regret toward anyone involved. I had learned that protecting your own self-respect doesn't require revenge, cruelty, or raised voices. It simply requires the quiet courage to stand firm in your truth while the world around you learns to accept it. A year had passed since the afternoon my father drove up the gravel driveway to ask for help, and time had gently smoothed over the sharp edges of our past. The lake house had become my sanctuary, a place where I spent quiet weekends away from the city, writing analytical reports and listening to the rhythmic lap of water against the wooden dock. One Saturday evening, a small package arrived in the mail, sent directly from my mother. Inside was an old leather-bound ledger that had belonged to my grandfather, filled with his neat, precise handwriting from decades ago. Accompanying it was a simple note from Alina, admitting that she had kept the book hidden for years out of guilt, but now realized it belonged solely in my hands. As I turned the aged, yellowed pages by the soft yellow light of my desk lamp, I discovered entries detailing how my grandfather had meticulously built his modest estate, emphasizing that honesty in business was the only true measure of a person's character. His quiet philosophy matched the exact principles I had relied on to protect myself and my boundaries during the family storm. I realized then that character isn't something that can be inherited through a bank account or stolen through clever legal fine print. It is forged through the choices we make when no one else is watching. Sienna visited the lake house late that autumn, not to ask for advice or loans, but simply to sit on the porch and share a quiet slice of apple pie in complete peace. We didn't talk about Marcus, the failed hotel, or the dinner that had almost destroyed us. We talked about the crisp autumn air, her small craft shop, and the steady beauty of the changing leaves. As I watched the night sky settle over the quiet water, I knew that true healing had finally arrived, not with a dramatic reunion or emotional speeches, but with the simple, unbreakable power of a peace well earned. As winter settled softly over the hills, the lake house stood as a peaceful shelter against the quiet cold. Looking back over the long journey, I realized how much my perspective on life and family had shifted. The girl who once felt the deep pain of being excluded and undervalued by her own parents had completely given way to an independent, grounded woman who knew her worth. I no longer measured success by corporate titles or external validation, but by the quiet certainty of my own integrity and the boundaries I kept. My firm expanded its ethical audit program that winter, allowing me to speak at national conferences on the importance of transparency and accountability in corporate finance. I shared my grandfather's timeless wisdom with young professionals, reminding them that true power lies in patience, accuracy, and self-control when pressure mounts. My parents continued their quiet life by the coast, enjoying a simpler routine completely free from the exhausting stress of social competition and artificial wealth. Our brief, polite phone calls were no longer burdened by old expectations or unspoken resentment, but held a mutual respect built on clear, unyielding distance. Sienna's craft business grew steadily through her own honest effort, and for the first time in her life, she took genuine pride in earning every single dollar herself. Standing by the large glass window of the lake house, as the first white snow began to fall over the clear water, I held a warm cup of coffee and smiled softly to myself. I had survived the trap set at that five-star dinner, protected my grandfather's cherished memory, and built a peaceful life completely on my own terms. The storm had fully passed, leaving behind a clear horizon, a strong heart, and the unbreakable silence of a truth that needed no further proof. By early spring, the story of Maren Clark had transformed from a personal struggle into a living blueprint for setting firm, quiet boundaries. I accepted an invitation from a publishing firm to share my experience, writing about how silence and self-control are often more powerful than any legal battle or angry confrontation. I established a small foundation under my grandfather's name to offer free financial literacy workshops, helping young professionals protect themselves before stepping into high-pressure agreements. I taught them how to read complex contract terms and say a firm, clean no without carrying guilt. My family had settled into their new realities with genuine acceptance. Sienna built her own craft business with honest effort, and my parents found peace in a simple coastal routine, entirely free from the exhausting burden of fake status. Standing on the wooden dock as the quiet lake reflected the clear sky, I knew my grandfather's estate was safe and his legacy honored. True strength isn't about winning a loud battle. It's about standing so firmly in your truth that deceit simply loses all power over your life.